Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 5.2A. I've entitled this video, The Boston Massacre. This video is going to cover pages 116 to 117. Trouble in Massachusetts. Protests continued to flare in the colonies, making British officials nervous. In 1768, they sent word to Britain that the colonies were on the brink of rebellion, that is, rejection of British authority. Parliament sent troops to Boston. As angry colonists jeered, the, quote, redcoats set up camp in the center of the city. For many colonists, this British act went too far. First, the colonists were convinced that the British had passed laws that violated colonial rights. Now, Britain had sent an army to occupy, or take control of, colonial cities. To make matters worse, the soldiers in Boston acted rudely. The redcoats, who were mostly poor men, earned little pay. Some stole from local shops and got into fights with colonists. Also, in their off hours, the soldiers competed for jobs that Bostonians wanted. Now we can answer a couple questions. Number one, why were the British officials nervous at that time? Because the protests were continuing to spring up all throughout the colonies. Question two, what does the word rebellion mean? That is a rejection of the authority group in charge. For example, in Star Wars, the rebellion wants to get rid of the Empire. Question 3. What nickname was given to the British troops that were sent to Boston? They were called redcoats. Sometimes lobsterbacks. That's a fun one too. Question 4. What were two reasons why many colonists felt that the British had gone overboard with their treatment of the colonies? Well, number one, they were convinced that the British had passed laws that violated their rights. And number two, now they were sending an army to push that, to occupy their cities. And they're like, what is going on? This is getting way out of hand. Question 5. What were two more reasons why the British soldiers were disliked by the colonists? Well, number one, they acted rudely, doing things such as stealing and getting into fights. And secondly, they were competing for jobs with other people from Boston. And when you compete for jobs, sometimes that can lead to tension. Tension in the streets. On March 5th, 1770, violence erupted. A fight broke out between some Bostonians and soldiers. As British officers tried to calm the crowd, a man shouted, "We did not send for you! We will not have you here! We'll get rid of you! We'll drive you away!" The angry townspeople surged forward. They began throwing sticks and stones at the soldiers. "Come on, you rascals, you bloody backs, you lobster scoundrels! Fire if you dare!" Someone in the crowd shouted. After one soldier was knocked down, the nervous redcoats did fire. They killed 5 colonists. Among the dead was Crispus Attucks, a dock worker who was part African, part Native American, and he is pictured here on the right. One Bostonian cried, "Are the inhabitants to be knocked down in the streets? Are they to be murdered?" The colonists called the tragic encounter the Boston Massacre. Question number 6. What impactful event occurred on March 5th, 1770? The Boston Massacre. Question 7. How many colonists died in the Boston Massacre? Well, in total, we had 5 people die in the Boston Massacre. 5 people dying for a massacre is probably a stretch, and that is an example of propaganda, which will be on the next slide. Here we see a great piece of propaganda. This was done by Paul Revere, the engraver, famously known for his Midnight Ride, which we'll get into a little bit later. And we'll be talking about this engraving and all the propaganda involved in it tomorrow. Spreading the news. Colonial leaders used the killings as propaganda, which is information designed to influence opinion. Samuel Adams put up posters that described the Boston Massacre as a slaughter of innocent Americans by bloodthirsty redcoats. Paul Revere made an engraving that showed a British officer giving the order to open fire on an orderly crowd. The Boston Massacre led colonists to call for stronger boycotts of British goods. Troubled by the growing opposition in the colonies, Parliament repealed all the taxes imposed by the Townshend Acts on British imported goods, except the one on tea. In response, the colonists ended their boycotts, except on tea. Trade with Britain resumed. Still, some colonists continued to call for resistance to British rule. In 1772, Samuel Adams revived the Boston Committee of Correspondence, a group used in earlier protest. The group circulated calls for action against Britain. Soon committees of correspondence sprang up throughout the colonies, bringing together protesters opposed to British measures. And now we can answer the rest of the questions. Number 8, what is propaganda? Propaganda is information designed to influence opinion. Question number 9, how did Samuel Adams and Paul Revere use propaganda to stir up anger in the colonies? Well, Samuel Adams put up posters that described the massacre as a slaughter, and he painted the redcoats as bloodthirsty. And then Revere made an engraving that showed the officer giving the order to fire on a bunch of helpless people who hadn't done a single thing. Question number 10. In response to the colonial anger, the British repealed all the Townshend Acts except for one. Which tax did they keep? The famous tax on tea. And the final question, number 11. What role did the Committee of Correspondence play at that time in our history? Well, they kept people getting angry. They kept people in the know. They wrote letters going up through all the colonies, basically bringing the 13 different colonies closer and closer together. Remember, they didn't have internet back then. They didn't have television. They didn't have radio. So back then, you had to write in letters or newspapers. And so to get the 13 colonies to feel more together, these committees of correspondence, they used their words to bring the colonies closer together to oppose the British. Well, thank you so much for watching. Before we go, of course, I've got a meme for you. When the snowball fight gets a little too intense. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.